Let me tell you a little story. I have lived in the 7th state to ratify the United States Constitution. This state was one of the original 13 colonies. This state was formed by Englishman George Calvert, First Lord of Baltimore, in the early 17th century, 1632 to be exact. And the state was intended to be a refuge for persecuted Catholics from England. And that state is named Maryland, after Henrietta Maria of France, who was the wife of Charles I of England. There are roughly 6 million people living in Maryland today. And in the state of Maryland, there are 27 correctional facilities. 27. And one of them is the North Branch Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland, also known as NBCI. It is a super high-tech maximum security prison, also known as a hypermax prison. The average daily prison population at NBCI is just under 1,400 inmates, and one of those inmates is a young man named Reno, and Reno is in his mid-30s. Reno was born and raised in Chicago and grew up in a household where his father physically abused his mother. And as a very young boy, Reno witnessed his father beat his mother to death. Just let that sink in. He watched his father beat his mother to death. Reno says that he remembers putting his head like right up in front of the television screen because his mother kept, in the midst of her beating, she kept saying, "Don't look, baby, don't look, don't look." And so he put his head right up to the TV screen, almost like right up against it, so he couldn't see what was happening, but of course he could hear it. And his father was beating his mother to her death. And soon thereafter, Reno went off to live with his older brother and his brother's wife and their children. And since Reno's older brother was a military man, he was often away from home for long periods of time. And in his absence, Reno's brother's wife would verbally abuse Reno and treat him differently than she did her own children with Reno's brother. And Reno went into prison at age 18. He was convicted as an accessory to a robbery that ended in a man being murdered. Reno was one of 5 men, young boys really, who took part in this violent crime. And because Reno was the lookout, he got caught. And because Reno refused to give up his co-conspirators, because he didn't quote unquote snitch, Reno ended up being the only person put on trial for the crime. And because the felony murder rule was applied to his case, Reno was the only person convicted of that man's murder. And Reno was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And he was shipped off to prison. And he has been in prison ever since. And he will remain imprisoned for the remainder of his natural life on this earth. For many years, Reno's older brother was his only real steady, frequent, and regular visitor. And Reno could always count on his older brother to show up on the so-called family day at the prison. And then one day, he did not arrive. He gave no advance notice. He left no word at the visitor's desk, nothing. And Reno never saw his older brother again. It would be months before he even learned that his brother had died of a heart attack. And Reno told me that while he was out in the prison yard one day, shortly after learning of his older brother's death, that every fiber of his being told him to run for the fence so that he would be precipitously shot by the hawk-eyed correctional officers in the high guard watch towers that police the yard. That way, Reno said, he could end his agony with a bullet to the back. And that was some time ago. Reno seems better these days. I receive his phone calls on the prison telephone monitoring system. I hear the recording when I pick up the phone.
This is a prepaid call from an inmate at the county correctional facility. All phone calls are subject to recording and monitoring. To decline this call, press 9 now, and to accept this call, press 1 now. Thank you. Your call has been accepted.
I go to the post office and get the money orders to keep cash on his prison books so that he can enjoy regular commissary. Last year, when the prison finally allowed inmates to buy PlayStations, I made sure Reno had one and all the games he desired to go along with that system. And he was like a kid in a candy store. And in that moment, however brief and fleeting it may have been for him, I sensed that he was able to summon up some joy inside his tears. Now, as a producer, I have worked in prisons, making television shows and documentaries, but I didn't know any of those inmates personally. I do have a cousin who was at one time considered a bit of a regional drug kingpin. He's now in prison for life. And although I have received letters from him and have written him back, I have never actually made the trip to visit him where he is housed in yet another of Maryland's 27 correctional institutions. Reno is the first person that I know personally that I love that I ever visited at a prison. And to this day, he's the only person I continue to visit in a physical prison. I have surrendered my valuables to a steel locker and waited my turn in the visitors' waiting room. I have stood in line with weary fathers, heartbroken mothers, and hopeful lovers and friends as we each and as we all slowly inched our way toward the metal detectors before having our bodies patted down and groped for incoming contraband. I have heard and have been shaken by the steel cages opening before me as I proceeded to the open, chilly room where the inmates eagerly receive and affectionately greet their visitors. One hug at the beginning and one hug at the end. Some of y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of y'all know. And I remember the quake and tremble of my body, shuddering as those same steel cages slammed shut behind me as I left behind my time with Reno. I have sat there staring into the face of a man who knows that I know that he will most probably never set foot outside of the daily control of his captors onto the fertile ground we sing about as the land of the free and the home of the brave. You see, his free space is confined to the day room and to the chow hall and to the showers and to the exercise yard. And that's it, brothers and sisters. His home, savage and smelly as it may seem to me, to us, the place where he lays his head and empties his bowels and passes the minutes and the hours and the days and the weeks and the months and the years. Reno's home is encircled with triple layers of steel enforced barbed wires, and those fences are electrified with voltages high enough to kill you upon human touch. Just imagine that. Imagine that, brothers and sisters.